really start. So welcome everybody to the masterclass and webinar about creative sampling techniques in Ableton Live. My name is Pascal and I'm a music producer and Ableton certified trainer. I see some familiar names in the chat. Please let me know where you're tuning in from and what's your name. You can respond in the chat. I'm curious where everybody's coming from. From Olin, all right, welcome. Where is everybody else tuning in from? Brussels. Hello, Brussels. Anybody else like to share where they're from? Schilde? Okay, super nice. Okay, Hoboken. Perfect. Thank you very much all for sharing. Let's get started. First, I would love to give you an overview of what we're going to cover today. As you can see on the screen, we're going to look at 5 subjects today. First, I would love to give you like a very basic introduction to sampling in Ableton Live. Which tools can you use particularly to sample in Ableton Live? Then we're gonna focus a lot on the simpler device. I will explain that in a second, what that exactly is. And we're gonna look at 3 things that you can do with a simpler device. One is very basic sampling tricks. That's the second topic. The third topic is we're gonna focus on the slicing function in Simpler and see what's possible with that. And then the fourth one is a really cool one. You can manipulate samples with Simpler too. We're gonna have a look at that too, and I will play you some examples. And then topic number 5 is advanced sampling techniques. Then we're also gonna explore at other tools and other devices in Ableton Live that you can use to for creative sampling techniques. And at the end, there's a Q&A. I'm more than happy to answer any question about the masterclass, or if you have any other Ableton questions, I can help you with that too. So if you have a question during the webinar, write it down for yourself or put it in the chat. And at the end, I will respond to all the questions that you have written down for yourself or that you have written into the chat. So let's get started. First, I would love to give you a basic introduction of what is sampling and which tools can you use in Ableton Live to start working with samples. I'm going to switch to Ableton. Okay, so what is sampling? Sampling is the process of taking an audio recording or an audio file and use it in a song. But I'm not talking about just recording an audio file. You're going to do something creative with it. Usually you put it in an instrument, and I'll show you which instruments you can use in Ableton. You can put that audio recording or that audio file into an instrument in Ableton, and then you can start using it as an instrument and do something creative with that element in your song. And there are multiple possible ways to manipulate or be creative with those audio samples in Ableton. But first, let me give you an overview of all the devices you can use to use samples in Ableton. First one is Drum Rack. I'm gonna add a drum kit. So Drum Rack is a drum sampler. In this device, you can add any drum sample you like and start building your own drum kits. So that's a very good tool if you want to start sampling drum sounds. Then an alternative drum computer in Ableton. It's not so well known, but it's a really good one. It's called Impulse. Let me also show you a drum kit. It's also a drum sampler device. So once again, you can take drum samples and put them into the Impulse device, and you can start building your own beats with this device. Then there's Simpler. Simpler is a musical instrument, and it uses audio recordings or audio samples as the core way of producing sound. So every time we add an audio recording into this instrument or into this device, we can use that audio recording as an instrument. In this workshop, we're going to focus a lot on the simpler device because there's a lot of stuff you can do with this small instrument. There's a bigger version of the simpler device. It's called Sampler. It's less creative than the simpler device, but you can use it to build multi-instruments. We're not going to focus it on this instrument in this workshop because the simpler device is much more creative than the sampler device. Then another tool you can use to start sampling is Wavetable. Maybe you're all surprised right now because Wavetable is actually a synthesizer and it doesn't work with samples. But you will see you can also use samples into the Wavetable and start creating sound with it. So we'll have a look at this too. And then another one, it's not so well known. It's called Granulator. It's not available standard in the Ableton Live program unless you use Max for Live devices. Then it's part of the Max for Live library collection, and you can use it again with audio samples. So there you have it. These are the best tools in Ableton Live to be creative with samples. So you can use Drum Rack if you want to sample drum sounds. You can use Impulse if you want to sample drum sounds again. Then you have the simpler device. It's a very creative tool for sampling. And like I said before, in this workshop, we're going to focus a lot on the simpler device. Then there's a bigger brother. It's the sampler. You can use it to create multi-sampled instruments. Then there's Wavetable. It's actually a synthesizer, but you can do something cool. Something cool with samples in the synthesizer too. And then there's Granulator. So that's the overview of all the devices you can use in Ableton. So we're going to focus on the simpler device. And first, we're going to look at some basic principles that you can do if you decide to start sampling with the simpler device. So the simpler device is a musical instrument, so I need a MIDI track to use it. So I create a new MIDI track. Then you can find the simpler device in the browser. You go to the instruments category, and there you have the simpler device. You can just drag and drop it into the MIDI track. And then at the bottom, you see the track view. There's the simpler device. The first thing I would like to show is like very basic sampling techniques in Simpler. So Simpler is designed to work with one sample. So every time you find like one audio sample, you can drag and drop it into the Simpler device and you can start using it as an instrument. Let me give you an example already. So I have a folder over here with bass samples. Let me preview a few of those bass samples. There you go. And I can use all of them in the Simpler device. And it's a matter of dragging and dropping the sample into the central area of the Simpler device. I just drag it over here. And now I can play it as a musical instrument. So that's a very basic thing or the most basic thing you can do with a Simpler device. You can drag any audio file that you have on your hard drive into the Simpler device and you can use it as a musical instrument. But there's one thing we need to keep in mind. Right now, I have a selection of bass samples that are all tuned into the C key or into the C note. Why is that so important? Because the Simpler is calibrated to C. So every time you drag a sample that's tuned to C into the Simpler device, the tuning will be correct. Let me show it to you. You can go to the audio effects. There's a tuner device that will show to me that my sample is correct. Is tuned correctly. I play a C note. and the tuner shows me the output is also a C. But that's not always going to be the case if you sample audio files. Sometimes your audio file is not into the C key or into the C note, so the simpler can't really work with it in the perfect tuning. So you need to retune your samples in the simpler device. Let me show you how that works. So I'm going to drag and drop a new simpler device on the track. I go to another folder, and here I have a sample that's tuned differently. This is tuned into A. So once again, I drag and drop it into the simpler device. If I play a C note on my MIDI keyboard, the simpler is not gonna output a C note, but an A note. So the tuning is totally off. You can't use it with other instruments right now. So you're gonna have to tune the sample into the right tuning. And you can do that in the simpler device itself. The simpler device has two pages. You have a sample page and you have a controls page. In the sample page, you see the global overview, you see the waveform, and in the controls page, you have some details that you can change. So I switch to the controls page, and here is a pitch area with some functions that I can use to retune the sample that's inside the simpler. And I'm going to look at the tuner to see if I'm hitting the correct tuning. So every time I play a C on my MIDI keyboard, the tuner needs to show a C note too. But right now it's an A note, so I'm out of tune right now. So I can use the transpose function to really start tuning my sample. I have to tune up. So I added 3 semitones. C sharp now, sorry, it's one too much. 3. And now, whenever I play a C note on my MIDI keyboard, the simpler is also outputting a C note. So that's a really important thing to do. Every time you start sampling one note, you need to check if the tuning is correct. Otherwise, you can't use that instrument with other instruments in your session. It will sound out of tune that way. So a very important thing to double check every time you start sampling audio files. So you drag and drop the audio file into the simpler device. You switch to the controls page. Ideally, you add the tuner too. You can find the tuner in the audio effects, and in the controls page, you can go to the transpose function and you tune your sample accordingly. What do you need to see as a result? Every time you play a C note on your MIDI keyboard, the tuner needs to output a C tuning too. And then your sample is perfectly tuned. Hope that makes sense. Try it out. It's gonna work. So very basic sampling techniques, but they're really important because otherwise your samples will be out of tune. Let's be a bit more creative already. Sampling was used a lot in the 80s and 90s. And what they were doing at that time was sample memory was very small. So usually they just took one sample of a sound and they created like a large part of the track with it. So you can recreate that typical 80s or 90s vibe by just using one sample. Let me just demonstrate it to you. So I'm gonna make a new MIDI track. I'm gonna add the simpler device again. There we go. And I go to the samples again. Excuse me. So I have a chord over here. I sampled it from a record. Just one hit of the chord. Gonna add it to the simpler device. And now I'm gonna get that authentic old school vibe by just using one chord to play. Just gonna make it a bit louder. But let's just a second. Let's be a bit more creative with it. So I'm going to the audio effects and I want to dive a bit deeper into that 80s and 90s sound. by reducing the bit rate and the sample rate of the sound. That was very typical of those decades. The audio quality was a bit little less than what we're used to right now, but somehow that had like a really nice vibe, that reduced audio quality. You can simulate that with the Redux audio effect. It's basically a sample rate reducer and a bit crusher. So you can reduce the sample rate. You see, it's degrading the audio quality, but it has a certain quality, or it has a certain vibe. You can also reduce the bits or the bit rate, or combine them, of course. And you have that typically 80s or 90s sound. Let me just create a rhythm with it. So just punching some notes. And you have immediately that 80s or 90s dance vibe. So another trick you can do, you just sample one chord in the simpler device and you downgrade the audio quality a little bit with the Redux device and you have that old school vibe. Another creative thing you can do with samples in the simpler device is reversing. So we're going to get a bit more creative with the sound now. So I add the simpler device again. And let me demonstrate that to you with a piano sample. Once again, this piano sample is tuned into A, so I'm going to have to check the tuning again. Let's add a tuner. So I'm playing a C note, but the output is A. So once again, I go to the controls page in the simpler and I transpose a few semitones up, in this case, 3 semitones. I play a C note and the tuner is telling me it's a C. Just have to tune it down a little bit. And now it's perfectly in tune. So if I play a chord, it's in the right key. So you can also reverse samples in the simpler. How do you do that? You right click on the waveform. Excuse me. And there you have the reverse sample function. Click on it. And the sample will be played reverse. If you play a chord, gets a bit chaotic. Why is that? It's because the sampler will play lower notes at a slower rate, so they take much longer to play. And higher notes will play faster, so they have less time to play. Let me just quickly demonstrate that. So if I play a C note, that takes much longer than if I play a G note. That's much shorter because the sampler is playing that much faster to raise the pitch. So whenever you play chords, it gets a bit chaotic. You see? But there's a solution for it. There's a built-in warp function. And what is the warp function? The warp function is a function that will start time stretching your samples. So let's just activate it. What is that going to do? It's going to give every note the same length, even if it's reversed. And what is the length right now? The length is 1 bar. So every note I'm going to play will be stretched to 1 bar. So if I play chords with the reverse sounds, it will sound less chaotic now. You don't have to use that. If you switch it off again, every note will have its own length, but then it gets a bit more chaotic again, of course. You see? Not ideally, but that works too, of course. I prefer to switch on the warp function. Let me see if this one sounds better. That sounds really good. So every note that I play will get the same length because the warp function will make every length the same. And in this case, it's 1 bar. You can also change that. I can like double that length or make it half as long. So you can experiment with that too. So now it's 2 bars long. So it gives you lots of options to play with your sound. So there you have it. 3 basic techniques for starting with sampling. So first option is you just drag and drop samples into the simpler device. Don't forget to check the tuning. Sometimes they can be out of tune. Second option is to go for like an old school vibe. You just sample like 1 chord, you program a rhythm with it, and you degrade the sound quality a little bit with the Redux device. And then you have that old school sampling vibe again. And then the third option is you reverse samples in the simpler. Can be a bit chaotic unless you use the warp function in the simpler device. Then every sample will get the same length, and then it's like really like one whole that sound. So 3 basic features or strategies that you can already use if you decide to start sampling. But let's get a bit more creative right now. We're going to start slicing with the sampler device. So add a new MIDI track. I go to the instruments again. I select the simpler device. So what is slicing in the simpler device? I'm going to demonstrate that to you with a drum loop. So I drag and drop a drum loop into the simpler device. So basically, there's 3 ways that you can use the simpler device. One is classic mode. Second one is one-shot mode. Third one is slicing mode. What's the difference between the 3? Classic mode is the classic way of using a simpler device or a sampler. You drag and drop an audio file into the device and you can play it as a musical instrument. So you can play different notes on your MIDI keyboard, and the simpler will act as an instrument. So it also works with a drum loop. So I can play it back at different pitches. So that's the classic way. If you do that with a more melodic instrument, like that bass sample I was using, then I use it as a musical instrument. That's the classic way, or the classic function in the simpler device. Then there's also the one-shot mode. It's the same as the classic mode. Like you're going to use your sample as an instrument, but now the sample will always play from the beginning until the end. That's not the case with the classic mode. In the classic mode, the sample will only play as long if you keep your MIDI key pressed. If I release the key, then the sound will stop playing. In one-shot mode, it will keep playing until the end, even if I'm not playing the note anymore. I'm not playing the note anymore, but it keeps playing. So that's the one-shot mode. That's very useful for sampling drums. If you look at the drum rack, then you will see that the drum rack is made out of simpler devices, and usually they're in one-shot mode. Typically, it's an example that's not in one-shot mode, but usually they should be in one-shot mode because they're short drum samples, and we always want to play the drum sample from the beginning until the end. So that's the second way of using the simpler device. And the third way, now it gets interesting, is the slicing function. Let me just show it in this screen. So what is the slicing function? As you can see, you see the waveform of the drum loop over here. I can slice it into tiny little slices if I activate the slice function over here. You see all those blue vertical lines? These are all slices in the drum loop sample. So Ableton searches for like all the transients in the waveform, and it will create a slice at the beginning of a transient. Because right now, the basic function is slice by transients. So Ableton will search every transient, slice it over there, and every slice will be assigned to a MIDI note. I will demonstrate that in a second. So let's say I go to a MIDI clip right now, and I play some MIDI notes, then you will see that every MIDI note will trigger one slice in the simpler device. So this is the first slice. This is the second slice, third one, fourth one, fifth one, and so on and so on. So every note will trigger a slice, and that will give you a lot of creative options. There's another way to slice it too. You can also slice by beat or by region, or you can also just do it manually, that you decide yourself where you want to put all the slices in the sample. But I'm going to take it easy. I'm just going to use the transient function. So Ableton will slice at every transient in the drum loop. And now I can start triggering all those slices and create something new. A bit of trial and error, because you never know what's inside each slice. So you have to experiment a bit. So let's see what we already have, and then I'll finish the drum beat. That's already cool. So let's finish this drum beat. You really have to spend some time searching the right slices. But it's worth it. You can create some really cool things with this. Let me play you the original sample again. So this is the original drum sample that I'm using. And now I added it to the simpler device. I sliced it, and then I used different slices to create my own rhythm with the sound of that drum loop. It's a very cool trick to be creative with any drum loop or any rhythmical element in your simpler device. So the slicing function, very cool. I use it a lot. It's a really cool function. But of course, you can also slice other things in the simpler device. And I would love to give you a real life demonstration of a track I produced. So I'm switching to Ableton Live 11 right now. So what do we see here? This is a track I produced for the artist called Mona Lisa. The track is called Symphonies of Love. And we use the slicing function in this track too. Let me already quickly demonstrate it to you. You see the simpler device over here. You see all the slices that we created or that Ableton created for us. And then we built a track with it. So let me show you how we started. So we're working on the track. I will play it without the sliced elements. Switch this up for now. So this is how the track sounded without all the sliced elements. We had a chorus or a chord progression, but it lacked some character, so we decided to start experimenting with sampling. We wanted to sample other songs, but there's a tricky part with sampling other songs because it's illegal, so don't do that. So we figured out, what if we sampled our own songs or the songs of Mona Lisa itself and see if we could be creative with that. So we figured out the key of the song that we were working on, and that was a G sharp minor. And then we looked into our catalog and we found 2 songs in the same key as the song we were working on. So we decided to start sampling these songs again. So it's our own work. We just sampled our own work in the new song that we were working on. Let me just quickly demonstrate the 2 songs that we picked to sample. This is the first one. The piano ballad. We'll play it with the vocal.
Carrying old memories that no longer need to be.
So that's the first song we decided to start sampling, and I'll play a little bit of the second song too. It's also piano, but with a theremin. So let's focus on this second song first. So I used the same technique. I added a simpler device to a track. I drag and dropped the recording, this one, into the simpler device. And then I decided to slice it with the slice function. And I let Ableton decide to slice it by every quarter beat. So you see, we got quarter beat slices. And then I used the same approach. I started triggering different slices in the simpler device, as you can see over here. And then we came up with a new melody based on an old song over with this technique. Let me play it to you. I just need to activate this. So what you hear here in this example is this recording in the simpler device sliced, but also forgot to mention that we reversed it too. So we reversed it, then we sliced it, and then we picked some slices, and then this was the end result. Let me play it to you again. You can see the slices that are getting triggered. So you can be very creative with this technique. We did that the same with the other song. So same principle, we took this song, we put it into a simpler device. Was this one. We also reversed it with the reverse function and we sliced it again. And then same principle, we start searching for slices that we could use to create something melodic or something cool with it. And then we came up with this. We play the track in solo. Now I'll show you the slices too, so you can see which slices are getting triggered. And then we came up with this. We would never been able to create something like this without the slicing function and without the reverse function in the simpler device. It's impossible. That was the only way to get a sound like this. So same principle, we reversed the sample, we sliced it, and then of course it's a bit of trial and error to find the right slices in the simpler device. But if you put some time and effort in it, you'll always find some really good combinations. So that's a real life example of slicing in a track. Let me play you the whole chorus now. So all these sounds you will hear are all sliced samples. So I use those techniques myself in productions or tracks that I create for artists. So that's the slicing function in Ableton. Try it out. It's really cool. So as a summary, slicing, you can use it to slice up a sample in many tiny parts. Then you can start triggering those parts with MIDI notes. Takes a bit of trial and error and some experimenting, but you can usually always come up with something cool and unique. So let me show you, let me play you the drum sample again. There you go. Next topic, manipulating samples with Simpler. So we're going to get a bit more experimental now. Let me create a new MIDI track. There we go. So for this demonstration, I'm only going to use one sample. Let me play you the sample. This one, it's just a kick drum sample. But I will create a whole drum kit with a kick drum, a snare, a hi-hat, and a clap sound by manipulating this sample in the Simpler device. You can get really creative with samples in the Simpler device. You can even make a whole track with just one sample. So once again, I drag and drop the Simpler device on the track. Then I drag and drop the kick drum in the Simpler device, and let's just start creating a drum kit. So I'll start with a kick drum. Just 4 to the 4 for now. So we have a kick drum. Let's already start changing the sound a little bit of the kick drum. It's nice, but we can make it even better. So I'm going to switch to one-shot mode. That's the best mode for sampling drums. And it will always play the sample from the beginning until the end. Then I go to the controls page. And let's activate the pitch envelope. Give it a bit more attack. So the kick drum will get a more snappy attack by using the pitch envelope. Every time you want more attack or snappiness on your samples, just start using the pitch envelope. Without. And let's add a bit of color by adding some overdrive. Audio effects are really cool too when you start sampling. I'm not focusing that hard on them in this workshop because there's so much to show in the Simpler device. But of course, you can use a lot of audio effects to change your sound. I'm using the saturator now to overdrive the kick drum. There we go. We have a kick drum. So I started with this sample and I already transformed it into this. I'm going to keep using the same sample and now I'm going to transform it into a snare drum sound. So I'm just going to duplicate the track. So this is my kick drum. This will become my snare drum. Just going to change the MIDI a little bit. I need less notes. Okay. So the snare drum is still the same sound as the kick drum right now. So let's transform it into a snare drum. The first thing we're going to do is transpose the sample. We can use the transpose function here again. It's already better, but still not a real snare drum. But we're getting closer already. So one important part is to change the tuning of your sample. It needs to be higher than the kick drum. Then a snare drum is usually shorter too than the kick drum. So I'm going to shorten the sound with this function. With this function, you can make a sound just very short or much longer again. Sounds a bit brutal, so let's add a bit of fade out. That's getting better already. Let's play it with the kick drum. That's already a snare drum, but I'm pretty sure we can still improve it. Can be a bit longer again. Okay, let's see what we can do with the warp function again. So I'm gonna start stretching the sample inside the simpler device. And it can get really nice sounds for a snare drum. You just have to experiment with it. I like this one. Let's change the pitch envelope a little bit. Maybe like this, a high pitched snare. Not a perfect snare, but it works. And I'm only using this same kick drum sample. So you can really manipulate all your sounds into something else with the simpler device. Okay, let's finish the sound. Gonna add some reverb. Clean up a little bit in the low ends with the filter device. Let's switch it to high pass filtering. There you have it, a snare drum created out of this kick drum sample by only using the simpler device and a few audio effects. Let's continue building our drum kit. I want to build a hi-hat. So I'm going to duplicate the track again. It's going to be my hi-hat sample. Let's change the MIDI pattern first. Okay. Still sounding like a snare drum, so we're gonna have to change it, of course. So let's start changing it. First, I'm gonna filter it a bit more. A hi-hat is like a very thin sound usually, so I'm gonna remove more frequencies. And then I need to find a way to make it a bit more noisy. And you can do that with experimenting with the warp functions in the simpler device. I get good results if I switch to texture and then start changing the grain size. What's a grain? Ableton slices every sound into very tiny particles, and every particle is a grain. And they can be like big or they can be like very small. And you define that with the grain size function. If you make them very small, you get that noisy sound of your sample. Make it a bit shorter again for a height. There we go. We almost have a height. Gonna make it a bit softer here. We don't need reverb right now. It's getting close. Let's fine tune it by adding an audio effect. There's a really nice audio effect called erosion in Ableton, and it's gonna add a bit more noisiness to the sound. So I'm adding erosion. I switch it to white noise. It's a matter of experimenting a bit now. There we go, without erosion. Once again, it's still that same kick drum that we started with, but I transformed it into a hi-hat now. As you can see, you can really manipulate all your sound or your samples in the simpler device. You can just pick any sample and you can create music with it. So kick, snare, and hi-hat. One more example of manipulating sounds. But now I'm going to use another device. I'm going to use the impulse device. So impulse is a drum sampler. So we're here. So I'm gonna sample my hi-hat, put it into the impulse device, and start manipulating it over there again. But first, I need to sample my hi-hat. How can you do that? You can do that by creating an audio track. And an audio track has a router option. In this router option, you can define where which sound will be the input of this track and where the output of that track will go to. So I want to receive the sound of the hi-hat on this audio track. So I'm going to choose the audio from the hi-hat sound. So the hi-hat will be sent from this track to this track, and then I record it on this track because I decided in the router that the track needs to listen to the hi-hat track and record it. I'm going to put it in record modus. I'm just going to record one hi-hat. That's all I need. Here's the recording. I don't need much more than that. Then I only need this little slice, so just gonna decide that with the loop function. I just create a little loop around the slice that I need, and this slice will be dragged into the impulse device. I still need to add the impulse device. Here it is. So now I'm gonna drag this little sample into this drum device. So I drag and drop it into the impulse device. And now I can play the hi-hat sample from the impulse device. But I don't want to use it as a hi-hat sample. I want to use it as a clap sound. So what are we going to do? We're going to use the transpose function and the stretch function in the impulse device. Transpose is transposing the pitch of your sound. I'm going to pitch it down. And then I'm going to start stretching it with the stretch function. So the audio sample will be stretched and it will start degrading, but that gives cool effects. It's a bit of trial and error. This is what I was searching for. Let's add a bit of saturation too. And we have something that sounds like a clap sound. Let's add a bit of reverb too on this one. And there you go. I created a whole drum kit by just using one kick drum sample. This was the original sample. Let's play the whole drum kit again. So you can manipulate every sound you put into Simpler and transform it into something else. You can be really creative with these functions. So that was the manipulate with Simpler topic. Let me show you some advanced sample techniques now. We're gonna leave the Simpler device and we're gonna look at other devices you can use to sample sounds. First one is the wavetable. So I create a new MIDI track. And let's say we want to make a bass sound. So I go to the instruments category, I add the wavetable. And let's go back to that same kick drum that we used to build that whole drum kit. I can also add this one to the Simpler device and use it again to create sounds. How do you do that? You just drag and drop it into this part. The sample is added to the wavetable and will be used as the source for creating sounds. And now you can use that kick drum sample in your wavetable and it sounds like this. Then the whole sample is sliced into tiny parts, and you can scroll through these parts with this function, and then you can change the sound. So you're always playing back a tiny different other part of that kick drum sample. Something like this. Let's make it a bit bigger. And now we can create a bass sound. And it's all based on this kick drum sample again. So same case, you can drag any audio recording into the wavetable, scan the whole sound for interesting sounds, and you can make music with it. Let's quickly program a bass line. There you go. I created a whole drum kit and a bass line by just using this kick drum sample. So I used Simpler, I used Impulse, and I used the wavetable device. Okay, another cool trick is to use the granulator. It's a very experimental device. You can find it in the Max for Life library. Here it is, granulator. Whoops, that's a small error. So let me see if it works over here. Yeah, it still works over here, so we'll do it over here. So remember, when we're using the grain size in the simpler device, the granulator is an alternative way of using grains. So a grain is a tiny slice of audio, and you can use it to create music. Let me demonstrate it to you. So I go back to my piano sample. I drag and drop it into the granulator. The whole piano sample is sliced in thousands of tiny slices, and every slice is a grain. And the granulator will start picking grains like randomly out of your sample, and it will start creating sound with it. Just gonna turn up the volume just a second. As you can see, in the waveform over here, it jumps from grain to grain. Of course, you can experiment with it. Does it jump around in a small area? Does it jump in a larger area? And it will give you different kind of sounds. Where in the sample does it need to jump around? It's very experimental, but you can use it to be creative with your samples, of course. The result is usually pretty unpredictable, but as you can see, it creates really cool sounds based on any sample you add in the granulator. So, another creative trick you can use with your samples. And now I just realized I forgot one trick with the slicing, with the simpler device. I'll get back to it. Let me show you one other advanced sample technique. It's not really sampling, but you can use the idea of a sample and transform it into MIDI and then make your own version of it. It's also a way of sampling, of course. So let me demonstrate what I mean. So I have this drum loop over here. Which one? No, it's not this one. This one. Let's say I like the rhythm in that sample and I want to create my own version of it. So first I'm going to add it to my session. Just drag and drop it over here. And then I'm going to use the convert drums to new MIDI track function. You can find that function by right-clicking on the audio loop and this menu will pop up. You select the Convert Drums to MIDI track function. Takes a bit of time. And then you get a MIDI track. And on this MIDI track, you get a drum computer. It's a drum rack. And you also get like a MIDI clip. And in this MIDI clip, you will find the MIDI version of the sample that you created or that you used. So let me play the original sample again. And this is the MIDified version of it. But of course, it's played back with other sounds. So it sounds a bit different, but it's basically the same rhythms. So it's not really sampling, but an alternative way of sampling. You just use the idea of the sample, and now you can start building your own version of it. So I'm gonna fine tune it a bit. Gonna change some drum samples in the drum rack. Let's say I want to have a kick drum, can be distorted like this. This one, I don't know. I'm gonna keep using this one, make it shorter. Also want to change the snare drum. Let's go for punchy, lo-fi, or lo-fi. This one, for example. So I created my own version of this drum loop. It's not really 100% sampling, but you just use the idea of the sample and you create your own version with this one. One more cool trick, and then we're at the end of our masterclass. I forgot to show you one trick in the simpler device. So let's go back to simpler. The MIDI track. We'd love to show you how you can create loops in your simpler device. So I add the simpler again. There we go. Then I'm gonna add a vocal recording. Let me play you back the vocal recording.
I feel I'm getting older, and leaves will keep falling.
So I want to transform this into an instrument. So what am I going to do is I'm going to search one syllable, going to loop that syllable and transform it into a vocal pad. I heard a really cool syllable here in the first phrase. There's like an O sound in it.
I feel I'm getting older.
The old van older. I want to use this little area as the basis of my instrument. So I'm going to isolate it. Do that with the start and the end function in the simpler device. I'm just going to isolate what I want to use. So I just want to use this syllable. Probably from here to here.
No.
Yeah. But I want to transform it into a vocal pad. So it needs to keep playing the whole time. I can do that with the loop function in the simpler device. So you can find it over here. I'm going to activate it. As you can see, the sound starts looping now. Without, and now with the loop function. But it still doesn't sound smooth or something right now. So we need to add some crossfade so the sound will like transform or melt into each other. I need to turn up the warp function before I can use that. So then I can use the fade function. And as you can see, the sound will fade in and fade out again every time the loop is playing. So it will melt into each other a bit more. And it takes a bit of fine tuning. And we have a vocal pad. Let's add some reverb. course, I need to tune the sound because otherwise it's going to be out of tune. It's a D and it should be a C. There you go. Perfectly tuned. Sounds like a vocal pad now. Let's play our drum beat and our bass line. And then I can use it as an instrument. And I'm just looping one tiny part in the whole vocal recording. And that's the basis of my instrument. Let me play the original recording again.
Getting older.
It's this one. But once again, you can use any sample and transform it into an instrument or even like a vocal pad sound. And then as a final trick, let's start adding some movement in the vocal pad again. It's always like very sustained, but we can add some more movement in it. And I'm going to recycle this drum loop. Let me just create a chord progression. So what I want to do is I want to use the rhythm of this drum beat to manipulate the vocal pad. And I can do that with the gate function. So I go to the audio effects, I select the gate, drag it to the vocal sound. And I'm going to let the gate listen to the drum loop I'm using over here. So that's track number 20. I activate the sidechain. So it needs to listen to track number 20 and respond to that. So the rhythm of the drum beat manipulates the vocal pad sound. I'm gonna do that before the reverbs. There you go. Another trick you can use in your own music. You can take a little sample out of any recording, start looping it, make it smooth with crossfades, put some reverb on it, and if you want to take it to another level, you can also add a gate function to it that gets triggered, for example, with a drum loop, and then you'll always get like nice creative results. So there we are. We're at the end of our masterclass. If there are any questions, I'm more than happy to respond to your questions. It's been a bit longer than I expected, the masterclass. So I hope you're all still there. So if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Saw the comment of Maria. It's like editing a picture. Yeah, sometimes it feels like that. Yeah. There are no more questions. I would love to introduce you to our latest course. Let me quickly show you. If you want to learn more about this stuff, we have a course coming up in September. It's called the Electronic Music Producer Course, your first track in 18 weeks. And in this course, you're going to learn more about sampling techniques, but that's not the only thing you're going to learn. You're also going to learn how to create beats, melodies, chords, sound design, mixing, and mastering. So in short, what's going to happen? We have 18 lessons in the studio here in Antwerp. The aim is to take every beginning producer to release its first track, and we'll teach you all the skills you need to start producing your own tracks. And at the end of the course, you'll be able to finish and release a full track completely on your own. You'll be guided by professional music producers like me. You get personal feedback, and there will also be a masterclass by a guest producer. So if you're a producer, DJ, or an artist, you're more than welcome. Bit of practical information. The lessons are happening every Wednesday from 7 to 10 p.m. They're happening here in the Tapelab studio in Antwerp. Well, you will learn how to produce music in Ableton. You will learn about songwriting, structure, song arrangements. You will also learn recording, mixing, mastering. And the aim is to teach you how to create a track from start to finish. So we'll cover every step in the process and we'll give you all the tools, workflows, and skills you need to build your own tracks in Ableton Live. And we'll work together for 18 weeks. Who are the teachers? I'm the main teacher. I'm an Ableton certified trainer, full-time music producer, mixing engineer. I have 155 releases and more, and around 8 million streams on all the platforms. And there's also Arne. He's a musician, music producer, and live sound engineer. What's all included? You'll get 18 on-site lessons plus a video recording of every lesson. You also get 4 hours of one-to-one coaching and feedback on your music. You get the Ableton Live Made Easy video course. It's 7 hours of video material. You get an exclusive masterclass by a guest producer. Also, core work writing sessions, Ableton templates, Ableton drum sample packs, Ableton Live presets, and educational discounts on music software like Ableton. We have a special offer today. We have an early bird price of 2,500 euros, but for all the people in the webinar, we offer an extra reduction of 10%, and that's valid for 24 hours. So the price will be 2,250 euros. If you're interested, send me an email at hello@tapelab.be or leave your email here in the chat and I'll get back to you. So thank you very much for joining this webinar. If you still have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or turn on your microphone, and I'm more than happy to respond to any question you have about sampling or Ableton Live or music production. I'll stay here for the next few minutes. If there are no more questions, then I would love to thank you again for joining me in this masterclass. I hope you learned something for your own music. Let me know if these tricks helped you to create music. I'm always interested in feedback and I'm always curious what you create yourself with everything I teach. If not, I wish you a very nice evening and hope to see you again in another masterclass. Oh, thank you very much. I see some nice comments in the chat. Thank you very much, everybody. See you later.